Fear of a direct war between Russia and the West is rising. Swedish Civil Defense Minister Carl-Oskar Bolin recently openly stated that there could be a war in Sweden. His message was reinforced by the military commander-in-chief, who said all Swedes should prepare mentally for the possibility. Now, there was a backlash in the country as the statements were followed by ominous TikTok videos that told viewers war is coming. Some accused the government of unnecessarily fueling panic, but the Swedish leadership is not alone with their assessment. Also, Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, chief of the NATO Military Committee, has warned that the West should prepare for an all-out war with Russia. The British Chief of Staff General Sanders said citizens should prepare and called to almost double the size of the army. And German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that the Russian attack might happen in the next 5 to 8 years. These statements came as NATO was preparing to launch Steadfast Defender 2024, the largest training exercise conducted in decades by all 31 member states in Sweden, which will run from February through May and will involve some 90,000 troops. All this coincided with the German government paper titled Alliance Defense 2025, which German tabloid Bild apparently had access to. Now, before we go into detail, we have to stress that this is a purely speculative paper. Not just speculative, but it plays out a very unlikely scenario. Anyway, here's the short form. In February 2024, Russia begins a new wave of mobilization, recruiting around 200,000 new personnel. This massive force helps Russia gain substantial successes on the ground in Ukraine. In July, Russia then begins cyber attacks and other forms of hybrid warfare on multiple countries in Europe, while spreading propaganda meant to victimize and incite Russian-speaking minorities in the Baltics, leading also to violent escalations. This newly created political crisis would be used to justify the deployment of at least 50,000 Russian troops in Belarus and Western Russia. Now, of course, this alarms media and politics in the rest of Europe, a sentiment which is utilized by Russia again to spread propaganda of an impending NATO attack, justifying the continuation of troop buildup in Belarus and Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave by the Baltic Sea. With all personnel and equipment prepared, the paper suggests Russia would wait until the US election to begin the second phase of its plan. Anticipating a victory by Donald Trump, causing chaos for a short while in the USA, Moscow provoked some kind of artificial border conflicts in the region at the end of 2024 to eventually repeat the 2022 invasion on NATO soil. The first objective would be to capture the so-called Suwalki Gap, which is an around 65-kilometer wide gap on the borders between Kaliningrad, Belarus, Lithuania and Poland, and the only land route that connects the Baltic states with the rest of Europe. By March 2025, under this scenario, Russia has 2 entire tank divisions, a mechanized infantry division, and a deployable division headquarters deployed outside of NATO borders with over 70,000 troops in Belarus alone. In consequence, NATO would have no other option but to approve measures for credible deterrence. On what the paper calls Day X, NATO orders the transfer of 300,000 troops to the area. 30 days later is where the scenario ends, without making any assumption as to the further outcome of this conflict. Now, like everything, just because it's not extremely likely to happen exactly like this, the ground notion is not impossible. The purpose a scenario like that serves, more than predicting the actual future, is to pose the question, let's assume if something like that really happens, are we ready? And then one can take any simple topic, like let's say ammunition, and one would have to admit, most NATO allies have significantly depleted their already small conventional military stockpiles and capabilities by donating their equipment and ammunition to Ukraine, and the industrial base is unfit to quickly replenish any of what was given out in the past years. To give an example, according to the Estonian Ministry of Defense, European countries would have to increase their production capacity by 140% just to meet Ukraine's minimum demands, not even their own. This is the direct outcome of a decades-long underinvestment in defense. 20 out of 31 allies failed to meet the so-called Defense Investment Pledge, which defines at least 2% spending of the GDP for defense, limiting the budget to 79 billion in 2023. The total deficit since 2014 amounts to more than 920 billion. Of course, one of the deciding factors for whether Russia would dare to, or is even in possession of the military capacity to enter a conflict with NATO, rests largely on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. If Russia wins, then the geostrategic borders shift radically. The Institute for the Study of War published a map showing the potential reach of Russian air defense should Moscow succeed in Ukraine. Let's also not forget that Russia has already deployed nuclear weapons to Belarus and is arming the country with ballistic missile systems such as the Iskander. Of course, events like what's happening in the Middle East or the Taiwan-China conflict are also never to be underestimated in their influence. It's a lot to digest, yes, and a lot to mull over. But if the war in Ukraine has shown us something for certain, is that sometimes, sadly, you get attacked, and everything you have ever known can suddenly be at stake. What do you think? Should Europe prepare more for an attack by Russia, or is it an unlikely scenario? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week.